Hello everyone, and welcome back to more Reddit HOA tales. In today's episode, a pair of men dressed in counterfeit Homeowner Association police attire aimed a taser at my expecting spouse right in our own driveway. They possessed weapons, backup, and absolutely no clue that I was a genuine police officer. That was a huge error. Let us jump straight into the story. The first narrative begins like this: I am using a disposable account since my wife, Sophia, is aware of my primary profile, and I do not want her to experience this entire ordeal again. Furthermore, this occurred roughly 8 months ago, and I am only typing it out because a user in a different thread requested the complete account. So, anyway, I work in law enforcement, having served for roughly 7 years doing patrols in a modest-sized city. One effect this profession has on you is that it completely obliterates any fantasies you held regarding the safety of your community. Locations that appeared perfectly safe before you pinned on the badge suddenly appear different when you are the person answering distress calls there at 2 a.m. After a few years of that lifestyle, I began thinking seriously about leaving the city. Sophia and I were leasing a 2-bedroom flat that was far too expensive for its value. When we calculated the numbers, we realized my income could purchase a genuine house if we relocated approximately 40 minutes away from the metropolis. Yes, I would be required to commute, but the thought of Sophia residing somewhere more peaceful while I worked night shifts seemed worth the effort. We viewed perhaps a dozen properties over a couple of months. Sophia works as an interior decorator, so she spots details in homes that I miss entirely. I enter and think, yeah, this seems okay. She enters and begins discussing sightlines, natural lighting, and authentic hardwood flooring, and I simply nod in agreement. The residence we eventually purchased, she fell in love with the moment we stepped through the entrance. She liked the crown molding and how the kitchen flowed into the living area. I merely saw a building that didn't smell strange and possessed a garage. However, she envisioned our future there. So, that settled it. What I focused on were the factors I could genuinely investigate, such as crime statistics for the region, which were favorable. Response times from the county sheriff were also respectable. Additionally, a quality school district, which didn't appear important at that moment, but proved to be significant quite soon. Peaceful roads, and neighbors who appeared to genuinely know one another. Everything was satisfactory. One detail I caught during my investigation was the existence of an HOA in the community. However, the catch was that membership was optional. You were not required to join when purchasing a home there. The prior owners had not been members, and after reviewing some of the HOA regulations and costs, we concluded that we were not interested either. If we altered our opinion later, we could always sign up. As it happened, choosing not to join proved to be one of the most intelligent choices we ever made. It was also a decision that placed a target on our backs, but I will get to that shortly. Due to my shift rotation, Sophia encountered the HOA security squad prior to me. She brought it up casually one evening while we were having dinner. She mentioned something about the neighborhood possessing its own security patrol. I inquired about their appearance, assuming it was likely just some retired gentlemen in reflective vests or windbreakers sporting the HOA emblem. Perhaps some aspiring tough guys wearing sunglasses. Then I witnessed them with my own eyes. I was carrying the garbage out one evening when their golf cart cruised past. These individuals had assembled uniforms that were clearly intended to resemble real police gear as closely as possible without technically violating the law: dark green shirts with shoulder patches reading HOA enforcement in gold text, black tactical trousers, and duty belts equipped with flashlights, radios, and I spotted immediately what appeared to be tasers in holsters. They even wore small nameplates pinned to their chests. The attire was not the worst aspect, however. It was the manner in which they conducted themselves. The driver gave me a slight nod as they drove by, as if we were fellow officers or something, as if he was on patrol and I was merely a civilian taking out my rubbish. I have worked alongside enough cops to identify when someone is pretending to have authority they do not actually possess. These men had the walk and the posture down. To someone who didn't know better, they probably looked quite official. That irritated me more than it should have. I told myself, however, that it was not my concern. We were not members of the HOA, they held no power over us, and I was not going to permit some men playing dress-up to spoil the peace and quiet we had moved here to find. But then the harassment began. Once the rumor spread that we were not joining the HOA, the security personnel started making regular stops at our residence. Initially, it was just checking in, asking if we had any queries regarding membership, and then it turned into weekly visits, and eventually multiple times per week. They would approach our door holding clipboards and enrollment papers, acting as though we had asked for information or something similar. They would state that the HOA offered the only true protection for the community and that the county sheriff was too overextended to respond rapidly. They would make subtle remarks about how lovely our home appeared and what a pity it would be if something occurred and nobody was nearby to assist. I held my tongue through the majority of it. I really did. I mean, here is something civilians do not always grasp. Once people discover you are a police officer, everything shifts. Suddenly, you become the person neighbors call at midnight because they heard a sound. You are the one people rely on to manage every argument, every issue, every worry. And I learned early in my profession to keep my employment to myself when I am off the clock. It simply makes life smoother. Therefore, I did not show my badge. I did not bring up my job. I just continued telling them politely that we were not interested and asked them to cease visiting. The issue was, they did not stop. This occurred right when Sophia discovered she was expecting. I do not know if any of you have ever managed pregnancy hormones personally, but they are serious business. Sophia has always been quite stable, but those initial few months were difficult, weeping at advertisements, desiring specific meals at 11 p.m. that I would have to drive 20 minutes to acquire, and mood swings that appeared out of nowhere. She was drained, uncomfortable, and emotional in ways neither of us were ready for. I was working full shifts and returning home to care for her, barely getting sleep myself. We were both operating on empty. Thus, the absolute last thing either of us needed was these HOA buffoons appearing at our doorstep, yet they kept arriving. Sometimes it was just to leave flyers regarding neighborhood events we were barred from attending since we were not members. Other times it was to remind us of our vulnerable status outside the HOA's shield. One occasion, they mentioned they had observed that I worked irregular hours and that Sophia was home alone frequently. That comment made my jaw tighten so firmly I thought I might fracture a tooth. I told them once more to stop visiting. I said it with authority. I thought perhaps that would be the conclusion of it. But it wasn't. The day everything fell apart, I was on duty. It was a Thursday, mid-afternoon, and I was typing up a report from a traffic stop when my phone buzzed. Sophia's name appeared on the display. She never calls during my shift unless it is urgent. So, I stepped away from my workstation and answered. I could not comprehend her initially. She was sobbing so intensely that her speech was unintelligible. She said something about the HOA. Something about police being at the residence. My chest constricted in a manner it hasn't since my rookie year on the force. I told her I was on my way. I obtained authorization from my sergeant to depart, and I drove home more rapidly than I should have. The entire journey there. My mind was cycling through worst-case scenarios. A home invasion, a crash, something wrong with the infant. I kept telling myself to breathe and remain calm, but my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. When I turned onto our road, I spotted the lights before I even saw the house. 2 vehicles from the county sheriff were stationed outside, lights still rotating. A few neighbors were standing on their lawns observing. And then there was Sophia sitting on our front porch stairs, a blanket draped around her shoulders even though it was September and still warm outside, weeping while a female deputy crouched beside her. I parked crookedly and half-mounted on the grass. The deputy rose when she saw me approaching, her hand moving toward her belt before she noticed the badge on my hip. I am her husband, I stated. What occurred? Well, what happened was this: the 2 primary HOA security men, the ones who had been pestering us for months, had appeared again that afternoon. Same attire, same golf cart, same clipboard. However, this time, when Sophia answered the door, they didn't merely ask about membership. One of them, the larger one who appeared to be in command, told her they needed to talk about safety issues regarding our property. Sophia, who was fatigued and hormonal and completely finished with these men, told them that we were not interested and to please depart. The man did not leave, however. Instead, he said something to the effect that if we didn't join the HOA, they could not guarantee that they would be able to keep the baby safe. Sophia is fairly certain those were his specific words. They couldn't guarantee the baby would be safe. Now, I don't know if he intended that as a menace or if he was simply trying to frighten her into enrolling. That doesn't really matter, though. What matters is that my pregnant wife, standing in the entryway of our own home, heard what sounded like a threat against our unborn child, and she lost her temper. I don't fault her in the slightest. She began screaming at them to get off our land. She stepped out onto the porch, still wearing her slippers, still in the baggy t-shirt she had been wearing around the house, and told them they had 5 seconds to depart before she phoned the real police. And that is when the lead security officer drew his taser, an authentic, working device. He removed it from the holster and aimed it directly at my pregnant spouse. And I need you to grasp how crazy that is. Tasers used on pregnant women are extraordinarily hazardous. The electrical charge can induce miscarriages, premature labor, fetal cardiac issues, and so forth. There are recorded instances of fetal death resulting from taser exposure. Any police officer, any security expert, anyone with even fundamental training knows that you do not utilize or threaten a taser on a pregnant woman unless there is absolutely no other choice, and lives are in immediate peril. Sophia was in slippers, though. She is 5 feet 2 inches and weighed perhaps 140 pounds at that stage in her pregnancy. And these were 2 men, well over 6 feet tall, probably 200 pounds each. And one of them aimed a taser at her. She froze. She mentioned later that she doesn't even recall what she did next, only that her hands went to her belly and she couldn't move. The neighbor across the road, an elderly lady named Mrs. Burnridge, who had been observing from her window, dialed 911. The county deputies arrived within 10 minutes. When they drove up, the security man still had the taser drawn. From what I gather, the deputies had to draw their own firearms and command him to drop it before he finally obeyed. His partner just stood there the entire time, hands raised, taser still visible in his belt holster. Both individuals were taken into custody immediately. By the time I arrived, they were already in the rear of separate patrol cars. I saw the main guy through the glass, the one who had drawn the taser, and I had to restrain myself from walking over there. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore. I wanted to drag him out of that vehicle and beat him until he comprehended exactly how severely he had blundered. But I didn't. I went to my wife instead. I sat on the porch stairs beside her and wrapped my arm around her shoulders while she cried into my chest. Mrs. Burnridge brought over a cup of water and squeezed Sophia's hand. The deputies asked their questions, took their statements, and gathered evidence. They informed us the charges would likely include aggravated assault, menacing, and possibly more once they concluded their investigation. And they also informed us they had discovered other weapons in the golf carts. Not tasers, guns. Actual firearms that these HOA cosplay cops had been driving around the neighborhood with. I don't recall what I said. I think I just nodded repeatedly. My brain was still attempting to process all of it. That night, I didn't sleep. Sophia finally fell asleep around midnight after crying herself dry. But I just lay there in the darkness beside her, listening to her breathing, staring at the ceiling. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that piece of trash aiming a taser at her belly, at our child who was not even born yet. The following morning, while Sophia was still asleep, I brewed coffee and walked next door to speak with Mrs. Burnridge. I thanked her for dialing 911, and then I asked if she would mind if I told her the complete story regarding what had been happening with the HOA. She invited me inside, and I spoke for about 20 minutes. When I concluded, she just shook her head and said, "I knew something like this was going to happen. Those boys have been out of control for years." That was the first moment I realized we were not the only ones who had experienced issues with them. I spent most of the day going from door to door. Nothing theatrical. I would knock, introduce myself, and ask if I could share something that had occurred in the neighborhood. Most people said yes, and a few said they were occupied, and I thanked them and moved on. The responses were intriguing. Some people had no clue the HOA security possessed tasers at all. Some believed they were actual police due to the uniforms. But a significant number of people, more than I anticipated, had their own tales. These security men had threatened other residents previously. They had issued citations to non-members for things like leaving trash cans out too long. They had photographed people's yards without consent. And one man told me they had followed his teenage daughter home from the bus stop to ensure she was safe, which had terrified her. By mid-afternoon, my phone was exploding with texts from neighbors I hadn't even spoken to yet. Apparently, news travels rapidly in the suburbs. Someone had initiated a group chat about it, and that evening, someone proposed an emergency gathering at the community park. Not an HOA meeting, just residents getting together to converse. No bylaws, no formal schedule, just people showing up. When I arrived around 6 p.m., there were perhaps 40 people already assembled by the picnic pavilion, mothers with strollers, older couples, and a few teenagers who were clearly there for the excitement. Someone had even brought a cooler of bottled water, and someone else had cookies. And then the HOA board members arrived. 3 of them looking uncomfortable as hell. And walking with them, like he owned the place, was one of the head security guys. Not the one who had pointed the taser at my wife, though. The conversations around me went silent. People turned to stare. He walked right up to the edge of the pavilion and raised his voice like he was addressing a town hall meeting or something. "Okay, everybody needs to relax," he announced. "There has been a lot of misinformation spreading, and I think we need to clear some things up." I stepped forward before I could think about it. "Great idea. Why don't you explain your version of what occurred with your officers?" He looked at me, and I saw his jaw tighten, but he continued, "Your wife was being aggressive and confrontational. I warned her multiple times." "I was just trying to." "She's pregnant," I interrupted. 5 months pregnant. She told you to leave on her own property, and your guy pulled a taser on her. They aimed a weapon at a pregnant woman because she raised her voice. She was out of control. And they had a right to defend themselves. From what? Her slippers. She is 5 feet 2 inches. You have got at least 60 pounds on her. What exactly were you guys defending yourselves from?" He puffed up his chest. "Look, buddy. I have been doing security for years. I know the law a lot better than you do. So, why don't you just do you?" I kept my voice calm. Calm is scarier than yelling. I have learned that on the job. Because I am pretty sure you don't know it at all. I am a law enforcement officer. A real one. 7 years of service. You want my badge number? The color drained out of his face so rapidly I almost felt pity for him. Almost. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Oh, damn." I heard Mrs. Burnridge say, "I knew it," to whoever was standing next to her. You're lying," he stammered. "Yeah, that is definitely something I would lie about." In front of 50 witnesses, I gestured at the crowd, half of whom are definitely recording this on their phones right now. By the way, I stepped closer. Close enough that only he could hear me when I lowered my voice. "You are going to jail." "That is not a threat. It is just a fact. The charge is already filed. But I want you to understand something else. If you ever come near my wife again, if you ever even drive that golf cart down my street again, I will personally make your life become very difficult. Do you understand me?" He didn't answer. He just stood there with his mouth slightly open, looking like a kid who had just been caught doing something he knew was wrong. The board members attempted to do some damage control after that, talking about how this was an isolated incident and they were reviewing their security protocols, but nobody was really listening. People had already made up their minds. The meeting broke up pretty quickly after that. Everyone drifted home in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Over the next few weeks, things moved fast. The HOA, it turned out, had no way to prevent a community-led vote on new board leadership. Once enough residents petitioned for one, it had to happen. And when it did, every member of the board was removed from office, not just the ones who had shown up that night. All of them. The security guy, the one with the taser, ended up behind bars for a long time. His partner, the one who just stood there, got probation only. The discovery of the guns in the golf cart led to a whole separate investigation, but I don't know all the details on how that ended up yet. We still haven't joined the HOA. We probably never will. But Sophia has made friends with a bunch of the neighbors now, and a few of them have even hired her to help with their home interiors. She feels safer than she has since we moved in, and that is really all I wanted. The infant is doing wonderfully, by the way. Healthy delivery, a small girl. She sleeps through the night most of the time, which is more than I can say for myself. And the next story is another fantastic tale from our Pet Revenge, and it is titled, "If You Are a Newcomer at a Job, Avoid Being Mean to Colleagues." So, I worked at a pharmacy chain a few years ago. The entire crew was very nice, fun, respectful, and all that. But then there was Supervisor Mary. Okay, not the friendliest of people. And then her daughter-in-law, Susie, started working there as a cashier. Susie was Mary on steroids, pushy, rude, demanding. No one liked her, and no one liked dealing with her. So, I contacted the corporate hotline and inquired with a feigned innocent tone. I recalled hearing in orientation something about family members not being able to work together, particularly when one was a supervisor. And just like that, Susie was terminated. I am not sure why I had to do it since they shared the same last name. My guess is the manager, Mary's friend, let it slide. A small victory, but it felt good. I still smile about it today. Edit, regarding the name. It was a unique name in a small store, and they lived at the same address. I have worked in HR. It could have easily been spotted. And now let us move on to the next story. It begins like this: so, I reside immediately outside an HOA's jurisdiction. And when I say immediately outside, I mean the people on the next block are within the HOA, but my block is not. I am honestly not even sure why the boundary is in that exact spot. And during this whole thing, I never got an answer to it. The HOA must have also thought it was arbitrary because they spent years trying to get the zone expanded to fit the 2 or 3 blocks on either side of them that happened to just not be in the zone. Nobody outside of the HOA wants to be part of it anyway. So, a zone increase would just start a huge fight, with nobody actually agreeing to sign up with them anymore. Not because all HOAs are evil or horrible, I know most are, though, but because the president of this particular association was unhinged. She was known by almost everybody in the neighborhood because she felt like holding one position of moderate power was not enough. So, in addition to being in charge of the HOA, she was also the head of the PTA for the local school district. And the reason I knew that was because of all the times my daughter has had issues with hers, only for the school not to do a damn thing about it. My daughter is part of a study group club that, for some reason, meets before school actually starts, meaning that I need to drive her, and we need to be out the door at about 6:30 in the morning. And damn, RIP stars, those times remind me of when I was a teacher. I usually got up at around 5:40 or maybe 6 o'clock, and then I had to be out of the house at 6:40 at the latest, especially in the winter. That is some major trauma coming back. Anyway, my brain is barely functional as I don't even have my coffee and shower for work until after I drop her off. We walk outside, and the driveway is empty. My vehicle is missing, and my daughter and I react the same way to something like this happening, with blind panic. It takes us a good 10 minutes of freaking out before my brain kicks in and tells me to call the police. I called them about my car being stolen, and they came to investigate and get the information on my vehicle. Once they run the license plate into the system, though, they come back to me with some news. Officer, well, the good news is that we know where your car is, and it has not been stolen. It seems to have been picked up by a tow company late last night. I can give you their number, and you need to call them to figure out about getting the car back. Me, but I was just parked in my own driveway. They cannot just take a car for no reason, right? Officer, according to what we have in the system, though, they retrieved the vehicle because it was parked illegally and was reported by the HOA. Me, I am not even in an HOA. Can they really just get away with taking my car? Officer, if you feel like there was a crime committed, I can take a report now. Then we can look more into it. I don't know if he really couldn't do anything or just wanted an excuse not to do their work that early in the day. I don't know anything about the law, to be honest, so I didn't want to argue with him. I called the tow company to get more information and get it confirmed that the HOA did call and have my car towed, but I was not given the exact reasoning of how my car was not in compliance with them. I contacted the head HOA witch herself to find out what possessed her to tow my car away. I had stayed home from work with no way to get there and let my daughter stay home after the stressful morning. So, I had some time to get myself showered and awake before confronting her. Me, did you authorize the towing of my vehicle yesterday evening? HOA woman, yes, I did. If you had bothered to read the latest newsletter I put out, you would see that we were going to be enforcing stricter rules regarding cars. Me, I wouldn't have received a newsletter since I'm outside of the HOA zone, which you know. You had no right to tow my car away. HOA woman, I need to keep the neighborhood safe. Me, okay, just for a second, let's pretend I was even part of the HOA. How is parking my car in my own driveway against anything? I was not sticking out into the street or even blocking a sidewalk. HOA woman, it violated the HOA's approved color palette. Black, white, and silver are the only colors allowed. Me. Aside from that rule being stupid, I feel like a broken record repeating myself. I am not part of the HOA. You cannot enforce anything on a home that is not even a member of your HOA. If you just call them up and get my car returned to me, I won't press charges on you. I just want my car back. I felt like this was more than a generous offer on my side, and she would have to be an idiot not to accept it. Well, she is an idiot, I guess, because she refused using the worst claim I've ever heard or even seen online from an HOA. The car is visible from within the HOA, so that means it needs to comply with our rules. I had no response to this because I was just dumbstruck at how crazy she sounded. This woman should not have been in charge of anything. I was not giving her a blank threat either. I filed a lawsuit against the HOA for grand theft auto for having my car illegally towed. I also filed a separate lawsuit against them in order to get the money back that I had to pay in order to get my car back because I couldn't sit around for months waiting for them to be ordered to give it back. But the best I could do was try and get reimbursed for it. I also forgot to mention that my car, which is horribly the wrong color and clearly an eyesore for the entire neighborhood, is simply red. Just a solid red that is in no way altered from the factory. A nice red car that, upon getting back, had a big black scratch down the entire side. As if when it was taken away, nobody was careful, and it got damaged. Damage nobody else wanted to take responsibility for and pay for. So again, I had to put the money up front and try to get it back in the lawsuit. It was open and shut, with the HOA lawyer not wanting to take this kind of thing in front of a judge. In the end, I was given back the money. As for grand theft auto, their lawyer managed to get it marked down to a misdemeanor and stop anybody from going to jail. However, it doesn't stop there, and the HOA president got some more karma courtesy of me. I was not shy to tell my story to anybody, and the news and gossip spread about her all around the high school and the parents. The PTA was displeased having someone like her representing the school, and she was kicked out and replaced. As for the HOA, her reputation there was also damaged, and she was removed from power there as well. Hopefully to try and stay out of trouble or keep actual HOA members from thinking of them in a negative light. All well-deserved punishments for her, considering what she had done and the goal to think it was okay. And the next one is a fantastic petty revenge story that is titled, "A Neighbor Frequently Took My Tools Until I Reciprocated." So this happened a while back, but a Reddit post jogged my memory. I used to have this neighbor who used my assortment of tools as if it were his private rental agency, except for the part where you actually return the items. Most of the time, I didn't really care because I didn't use the tools so often, but I always ended up having to wander over days later to reclaim my own belongings. One time, I actually needed a tool back only to find out that he had borrowed it and then lent it to a friend of his. That tool vanished into the void forever. Granted, I should have handled this better, but a few days later, to make this end, I requested to use his lawn mower. I made the excuse, "I always let you borrow my tools." I used it and put it back exactly where it belonged. I simply neglected to bring back the keys when he came over the next day demanding them. Granted, I was always friendly when asking for my stuff back. Oh, I remembered last night. I left them with Jimmy. He said he would mail them back to you. After the neighbor left, I genuinely placed the keys in the postal mail. Weirdly enough, at this point, thankfully, he never asked to borrow anything from me again. And yeah, guys, thank you for watching.